politics, i.e. a strong campaigner and a conservative. Miller Hicks, who is one of the Reagan floor whips, has been talking to those same delegates. There's a fellow down in Texas here, Mr. Hicks, whose name is John Connolly, and I know the Texas people are very loyal to him, but let's look beyond that. Supposing it's not Connolly, what kind of a fellow are you looking for that can run and elect the candidates you need elected in November?
Richard, I appreciate it. I do want to say hello to my fellow Texan up there in the booth. I know he's 100% Reagan, as the delegation is. Hello, Walter. To answer to your question, Richard, I think we'll need a strong campaigner. Texas is used to strong, outspoken, personable politicians. I think anything less than that is a weak person just simply won't carry the South and West. We're individuals down there, and we need a strong individual personality to help.
All right, now you've defined the kind of person. Name me some names.
Well, Richard, I tell you, I've got one mission here tonight, and that's to get Governor Reagan elected president.
Well,
that's all I want to work on.
All right, what about a Reagan for vice president?
Well,
if it should come to that.
I'll have to respect Governor Reagan's opinion when he said I'm not interested in it. I will give you my opinion that I'd love to have him as vice president.
Thank you very much. Walter?
I don't think in the last quarter of a century have we seen a Republican convention quite as spirited as the one here. Good spirits for the most part, but underlying an awful lot of tension between these Reagan and Ford supporters. It's almost bound to be that way with a race as close as this race has come to be. And tonight, apparently, there is some concern that with all those high spirits and with the race coming to its conclusion tonight, that maybe something could explode between these two groups so enthusiastic for their own man, who work so hard for their candidates, who come here to Kansas City to cast their votes, and with half of them almost half of them seeing those hopes go down the drain tonight. Well, perhaps because of all that, Senator Robert Griffin, Ford's floor leader, and Senator Paul Laxalt, Reagan's floor leader, we're told, have been holding a last-minute conference just off the convention floor to sort of agree on rules of conduct tonight. Griffin said, frankly, that they hoped to keep down the potential for difficulties between the delegates for their opposing candidates during tonight's vote. Mariah McLaughlin is with one of those who is believed to be in the finals in the Ford selection of a vice presidential running mate, the UN Ambassador William Scranton. Mariah McLaughlin?
Governor, first of all, the first question to all of you who are on that mystery list or that unending list or whatever you call it, have you heard anything?
No, haven't heard a word. We just had President and Mrs. Ford with the Pennsylvania and New Jersey delegation, and they were terrific. And incidentally, we've got more votes for him tonight than we did last night in Pennsylvania, and things are going very well, and we're very happy about it.
Governor, is there an intermediary, someone that speaks to you but says, I'm really not supposed to be saying this, and but keep in there, Bill, and keep a stiff upper lip or something like that?
No, we haven't got any fishermen around at all. But I think the president is keeping this very close to his chest. I'm very glad he is. Quite frankly, he knows very well that I said I would do it if he really wanted me to, but I'm not looking for higher office, and I think most people know this.
It's horrible to ask someone who has said they are willing to do it if they're asked if they have a first choice other than themselves. Is there one?
No, I don't really have a first choice. I think it's awfully important that we get somebody that can, A, bring this party together and help do so, and I think that's going to happen, incidentally, and secondly, can get some Democratic and independent votes, which the party needs badly, and third and most important, and I hope this is the major criterion they use in the selection, that it be someone who really could be a very able president, because sometimes that happens.
Thank you very much, Governor Scranton. Back to you, Walter.
Governor Scranton was governor of Pennsylvania. He was a congressman before that. In 1964, he definitely had ambition for higher office. In that year, on Friday night, before going out to a governor's conference in Cleveland, at which the liberal moderates of the party expected to get together in order to stop the Goldwater bandwagon, he met in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, with president, former President Eisenhower, and he thought he had Eisenhower's blessing to lead that Stop Goldwater movement. But between that night and the next morning, the word leaked, and some of Eisenhower's close friends who were very powerful in the party got to him, and by the time Governor Scranton arrived at Cleveland for the governor's meeting, there was a phone call waiting for him in his suite at the hotel there, and it was Eisenhower on the phone blowing the roof off, saying how did the story leak in the first place. He never intended to give Scranton his endorsement, and he withdrew the whole thing, and the bubble burst. Well, with all the talk, the rumor, the speculation about the vice presidential selection, our own political expert, that's in quotes, Andy Rooney, has a solution to the problem.
Walter, I've talked to 14 neutral observers and 21 usually reliable sources here in Kansas City. They all feel that President Ford is overlooking the one dramatic move he could make to assure a victory in this vice presidential game he's playing against Ronald Reagan. Now, as I understand it, Reagan lost delegates by naming his vice presidential choice too early. Now, he also lost in his effort to change the rules so the president would have to make the same mistake. Ford says he's still considering 12 men or women, all men, for the job. That means if he names one of them, all the rest are going to be sore at him. So let's look at Ford's alternatives. Everyone in the country is calling for a reduction in the size of the Washington bureaucracy. They think there are too many people in government. Ford could very effectively counter Reagan and win a lot of votes by saying he doesn't want anyone for vice president. He could simply say that as far as he's concerned, we're not going to have one anymore. What difference will it really make to the country? Being vice president is like being a substitute quarterback on a football team with Joe Namath. I mean, even when Joe isn't any good, the substitute doesn't get to go in. So, if Ford doesn't choose a vice president, he won't make any enemies, and he'll save us all a bundle of money. The office costs millions of dollars, and for what? Right here in Kansas City, Vice President Rockefeller has a staff of 10 people, and he isn't even running for anything, he says. The vice president is paid $62,500 plus $10,000 for expenses. He has a government plane at his disposal for taking him places that doesn't really matter whether he ever gets to or not. Nelson Rockefeller says he doesn't take the $72,000, of course, but how would he know? So that's my advice to Gerald Ford. Take it or leave it. Announce to the world that you're going to start cutting down the bureaucracy right at the top by not having a vice president. See how Ronald Reagan responds to that.
The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
Could have their taxes wiped out, nothing, without curtailing a program. If only America were not burdened down by the wide spending of Democrat Congresses in the past. And this Democrat Congress is putting a still heavier burden on those who are yet to come. How long, America, can we continue down that road without the whole system collapsing? And that's where the Democrats will take us. My friends, they really believe, and here we come to the fundamental difference between a Republican and a Democrat. All Republicans, every Republican in this Paul can unite on this difference. A Democrat tells us that America is great because of what government does for people. Republicans say that's nonsense. America is great because of what our government permitted our free people to do for themselves, and that's what it's all about.
On the convention floor here, purely political speeches at the moment, exhorting the delegates to get out and work for gubernatorial candidates and for candidates for the Congress in the 1976 election. We're still perhaps 15 or 20 minutes away, maybe a little bit more, from the roll call, which will begin the balloting for the president here tonight. Meanwhile, the speculation goes on about this vice presidential matter in case President Ford gets the nomination, as expected this evening. And sometimes convention delegates, as you know, try to have the vice presidential selection to themselves. They're entitled to that. It's just become a matter of policy and custom that the presidential nominee names his own running mate. They try to sometimes, these conventions, to force a name upon their presidential choice. Roger Mudd is with delegates from Georgia who would sort of like to see that happen this year, I gather, Roger.
Walter, Georgia is a very strong Reagan state, and I've got two gentlemen here who are members of the delegation, and one of them I want to talk to right now. He's a state representative. His name is Bob Beckham. Can I butt in 1 minute? Mr. Beckham says that the only way that the Republicans are going to win in the fall is to have Reagan as the vice president. Now, how are you going to get him nominated, Mr. Beckham?
Well, we're just going to have to put his name in the nomination and do the best we can if he doesn't win the nomination on his own.
Well, assuming he loses tonight and assuming that he is going to stand by his word and not accept the number 2 position, where does that leave you?
I don't believe that Ronald Reagan will turn down the vice presidency if he is nominated from the floor of this convention. And if we, as Republicans, want to unite the Republican Party, I believe he does, we'll just have to draft him and put him up for vice president and do that. We'll get 5 states and get the majority support in 5 states and put his name up, and after he's nominated, he'll have to come and resign.
Right in front of you.
He'll have to come right down here and tell us he doesn't want the job.
You think he'd do that?
I don't believe he would.
Well, suppose Mr. Ford doesn't want him. You're just going to jam Reagan down his throat?
We'll have a president and a vice president running for the job for the first time in probably the history of the country, and we'll have an independent vice president, an independent president, and I think that'd be great for the country. He'd be president of the Senate. I just think that we can
have his own little empire going, wouldn't he?
No, I don't think he has an empire going. I think it would get the opportunity for the things that he said to be heard with credibility, and I think it would be great for the country. I really do.
Now, you got to have 5 states for support. I assume Georgia is one of them.
My goodness, we can get 5 states at the snap. That's the easiest thing to do.
All right, now I got one more. This is Mr. Sam Tate, who is the Reagan chairman in Georgia. He just got a phone call from Andy Carter, and Andy Carter, the Reagan headhunter, says Georgia is now the 5th state to support the Reagan vice presidential nomination.
Since our delegation is solid with 48 delegates, we are thrilled that we are one of the states to sponsor the nomination of Ronald Reagan.
So it's going ahead, a Reagan for vice presidency, despite Reagan's refusal?
The phone call I got was on the original nomination of Ronald Reagan for president.
But how about vice president?
That wasn't discussed.
You don't believe that?
I do not believe
All right. Okay, Walter. So we got one man who thinks Reagan ought to be on the ticket despite President Ford's wishes.
So we might even have some excitement tomorrow night when it comes time to nominate a vice president. That's always a possibility, of course. This has happened in conventions before. It will be nothing new if a presidential nominee finds that the convention is balking at his selection of the vice president. His vice presidential running mate. As a matter of fact, it's happened quite a lot of times, just as recently as 1952, as a matter of fact, when that famous team of Harry Truman and the Veep, Barclay, got together. They really became such close buddies only after the nomination and the campaign began. Harry Truman had other thoughts about his vice presidential running mate, but after Barclay's keynote speech, there was such a wave of enthusiasm for him on the floor that Truman decided he better go along with Barclay. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
competing for this. Will you take with you into the rest of this convention the spirit that is captured with this poem with which I will close? I saw them tearing a building down, a gang of men in a dusty town. With a yo-he-ho and a lusty yell, they swung a beam, and the sidewall fell. I asked the foreman if these men were as skilled as the men he would hire if he were to build. He laughed and said, "Oh, no, indeed. Common labor is all I need, for these men can destroy in a day or two what builders have taken years to do." And I asked myself as I went my way, which kind of role am I to play? Am I the builder who builds with care, measuring life by the rule and square, or am I the wrecker who walks around content with the role of just tearing down? Republicans are builders. Let's in this convention build a united Republican Party that will win in November, and if we do, we will give to the American people the biggest and best bicentennial birthday present that any bicentennial convention could ever give to its people.
Ronald Reagan may have lost a bid for the presidency. That will be determined finally when the balloting begins in a half hour, 45 minutes or so from now, here at Kemper Arena in Kansas City. But the Reagan forces and the strength of the campaign he waged did succeed in getting some points across at this convention. One of the things they did, they got a foreign policy plank into the platform that was much stronger against détente and against some of the relations with the Russians in the world than the Ford administration undoubtedly would like. Part of the reason they got it in, however, was that the Ford forces, feeling that the balance was so delicate in the number of delegates that they could count on in the voting tonight, they didn't want to do anything to excite these delegates and upset the apple cart. So they let the foreign policy plank of the minority group, that is of the conservative Reagan group, get through the convention last night. That's caused something of a hassle, this compromise. Bruce Morton can kind of fill us in on how it all got started last night.
Walter, it was very early this morning, I guess, is really the way to put it. The Ford people, as you say, were in no mood for a second roll call vote. John Rhodes, who is the chairman of this convention, is the Republican leader in the House of Representatives, and he learned how to do these things from the master, Sam Rayburn of Texas, who was speaker for so many years. Roman Pruska, who was the head of the president's platform forces, is a veteran senator. He knows all the parliamentary tricks. So what happened was that Pruska simply let the proponents of this new, somewhat critical plank state their case. They used up all their time. Then Pruska got up, said it was a wonderful plank. He was proud to accept it. That was what the president was doing with foreign policy anyway. Rhodes banged his gavel once or twice. There was a very quick voice vote. Rhodes said the ayes had it. A number of delegates were on their chairs even screaming for recognition. John Rhodes, with the practiced directional glance that good parliamentarians developed, simply didn't see them during the convention, and that was that. But there were a lot, as you say, of very raw tempers when things ended here this morning. Walter?
There are raw tempers out there on the floor of this convention, Bruce, over that issue and others. But for more on the foreign policy compromise, Mike Wallace is with Senator Clifford Case of New Jersey.
Senator Case. Walter and Bruce Morton and various other folks are talking about that. You cannot see Clifford Case? Now you got him. All right. Senator Case, Walter Cronkite, and Bruce Morton and various other folks are talking about that morality and foreign policy plank that was added last night. And apparently, because they didn't want any trouble, the Ford people went along. Question. You're one of the lonely liberals in the United States, lonely Republican liberals in the United States Senate.
You needn't change the word, I think.
And you've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate for about a dozen years. Were you angry at what happened last night on that platform amendment?
I wasn't angry. I wasn't. To tell the honest truth, as I've said to you just before, Mike, I didn't hear a word that was said when Roman Pruska was up on the platform. He announced that a compromise had been agreed upon, that he would propose to vote for it. The administration was satisfied with it, and it was put through without any delay. It was not a considered action. On the other hand, for most of us, there was no real choice. and what we have now, I must admit I haven't read because I've been busy on the main business of the platform.
I understand that, Senator Case, but I wonder if I could repeat to the folks out there what you said to me. What you said, in effect, was platform planks aren't worth a damn anyway.
Well, that was utterly unfair of you to quote me directly, but I repeat it now, and I only want to say that in the narrow sense, first of all, this didn't commit anybody to anything.
That's what I mean.
There was no action specified. It says, as I recall it, we love Solzhenitsyn. He's a great spirit.
Yes.
God knows I agree. There were some implied criticisms of Kissinger hidden in the language and of the administration by implication. But the fact that the administration accepted it, it seemed to me, must have taken most of the sting out of that.
Thank you very much, Senator Case. I hope that I did not do something less than honorable.
Entirely honorable and ethical and I should say very gracious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Case.
Dan Rathers with Tom Ellis of North Carolina, Reagan floor leader on that foreign policy issue. What does he have to say, Dan?
Well, Walter, Tom Ellis normally is a full-voiced, full-throated, articulate man. Tonight, his throat is raw, and I'm told, Tom Ellis, that last night that you wanted a roll call vote, and when you didn't get it, you stood on your chair. My teammate, Richard Threlkeld, tells me you shouted, if this is the kind of Republican Party you're going to run, you can have it.
I think that's substantially correct, yes, sir.
Well, what are you angry about?
Well, we sent up to Mr. Rhodes, the chairman, a note that we wanted to have a roll call vote on the morality and foreign policy platform plank. We had the backing of 9 states. Mr. Rhodes was well aware of this. It was to him in writing. He sent a note back that he had received it. This is all the rule requires that we have 5 states. Yet he refused to give us that roll call vote and refused to recognize me when I stood up to protest.
Why do you think he refused?
I think he just wanted to railroad this thing through so that delegates did not have an opportunity to express their opinion, because I don't think that there are a lot of delegates in this convention that would have wanted to vote against the policies of Jerry Ford and Mr. Kissinger on Solzhenitsyn, Helsinki, and some of the other things.
Do you think it was a tactical error on the part of John Sears, the Reagan strategist here, not to make last night's critical vote for your forces, the Reagan forces, on this foreign policy rather than smoking President Ford out on his vice presidential choice?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that in my mind. I think we had the votes to carry it, and it was on principle. And if the Republican Party is going to stand for anything and be successful in the fall, it's got to stand on principle and not gimmickry.
Walter, Tom Ellis, who's as mad as a shot bobcat with a toothache.
Well, I've spent some time in Texas, too, Dan. I never heard that one before. Morton Dean is with a Connecticut delegate who thinks last night's platform fight over foreign policy showed the futility of platforms.
Right, Walter. This is Congressman Stu McKinney. He's a liberal, a moderate, an independent. Take your choice. And do you think that the moderates took a dive, to use a street term, on the platform last night?
Well, I think we went down without much of a fight on 2 planks, basically the foreign policy plank and the abortion plank, but I think we felt it had to be done under the circumstances.
Doesn't make much difference to you, does it? You and some others have said a day after the platform is written and ratified, no one can find a copy of it.
I've never found that many delegates packed their platform to take it home with them, and I've never found that many candidates lived on a platform.
So what do you suggest? In Connecticut, by the way, the Republican Party has no platform.
We suggested there not be one in Connecticut. It worked out very well. We just said it was rather hypocritical, and I think it is sort of a hypocritical ploy of the moment.
Okay, and nationally, you think the party should or should not have a platform?
I'm going to suggest very seriously to the National Committee that they give up a platform by the next presidential nomination convention.
Doesn't that lead to a charge that the party stands for nothing?
I don't think so. I think the party shows by its record what it stands for, and I think that platforms are never lived up to.
Okay, thank you very much. Congressman McKinney of Connecticut. Walter?
The only major address of the night is just beginning. Senator Jacob Javits of New York, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is making that speech. Let's listen.
Thank this convention for adopting a strong anti-terrorism plank, which you did in the party's platform. Last week, a young man died, a senseless death at the airport in Istanbul. Hal Rosenthal was a member of my staff who was on his way to a conference on the problems of the Middle East when he lost his life in a terrorist attack as one of a number of helpless people who were killed or injured in that attack. He was 29 years of age. That blow, that extinction of a young life, puts into sharp and agonizing focus so that all may see what we all too frequently forget. Politics is about people, about individuals with individual problems, individual hopes, and individual aspirations, and individual agonies. And politicians must be dedicated to people. It is our duty, our reason for offering ourselves for office, our reason for offering our party as a way, the best way, to govern our country. And I speak as a fellow Republican who has been successful in running with progressive views in New York, the second largest state of our nation, with a 2-to-1 Democratic registration, and including the city of New York, long a Democratic Party bastion. Our challenge is to broaden the base of support among the people of the United States and to give the people the reasons why they should vote Republican in November. And although in 1976 the Republican voice may be conservative in impulse and tone, we are about to face a national election in which we must bespeak the aspirations and the will of millions of Americans who are Democrats and independents if we are to keep a Republican administration in the White House. This will not be done with rhetoric, but it can be done with reason. Men and women in public life nowadays have every reason to be uneasy about surveys which show widespread disenchantment with the United States political process. And we Republicans, in particular, must be concerned with other surveys which indicate that our party is the declared party of only 1/5 to 1/4 of the American people. We need to, and we can, forge a Republican majority of the American people as we give them reason to understand that our party is their party, that we are a people's party, and this is not only for ourselves, but also for the two-party system, which is so essential to our freedom. For our two-party system can hardly be sustained if the party division gets too lopsided. We have always prided ourselves on being the party of equal opportunity for the individual, and the party that is dedicated to the right of the individual as much as possible to live his or her own life. But we Republicans who have had many achievements at home and abroad, have not yet cracked the way to deal with human vicissitudes and human catastrophes with the aid of government, but based upon Republican principles. Cancer, stroke, and heart disease always are expected to strike other people, not someone you know or I know. It's always someone else who is expected to be unemployed. It's always someone else who needs a daycare center to care for her child so that she can hold a job, or someone else whose parents need housing or long-term medical care. It's always someone else, or it's always a number of someone else's, or a class, or a headline. Well, the headlines don't cry the tears of individual hurt and individual need. When the television cameras leave the supermarket, the prices are still too high for elderly people on fixed incomes who are deprived or bewildered. And they need their Social Security, and they need their Medicare. And when there is a recession and millions are laid off, the unemployed still suffer agonies. And that, my fellow Republicans, is what politics is all about. It's about helping those who can't help themselves. And it's about making sure that every citizen has an opportunity to help himself or herself. It's about easing the burden of people, real people, with real problems. It's about enabling them to make decisions about the kind of people they wish to be, and the kind of country they wish to live in, and the kind of world they wish to shape. The principles we Republicans expound and the measures we take must ring true. They must be, and they must appear to be, responsive to the will and the needs of our fellow citizens. Political programs must give practical answers to the problems and aspirations of people. They are not ends in themselves. Politicians worry about the jobless, about how to carry the welfare burden. They decry the crime rate, are alarmed by inadequate productivity, and feel the dangers of decay and bankruptcy. Also in our great older cities. But behind every discussion of the jobless is an individual suffering the pain and the shame of being unable to provide for himself or his family. Behind the rising crime rate are individual people who have been hurt, maimed, robbed, or murdered, and whole families destroyed by a member who is an addict or a juvenile felon. Behind every food stamp and every school lunch program is a life-giving potential for undernourished and hungry children. Behind inadequate productivity is inadequate capital investment and lowered worker morale. There are remedies, and they can be Republican remedies. They can range from a strengthened private pension system, which we have now, and which is beginning to get started under the new federal pension reform law, to stock ownership by workers and cooperative programs with business for internal employment and manpower training and education, especially of the recession-type unemployed. From enhanced welfare payments as an option in lieu of revenue sharing to government business projects for the rehabilitation of felons and addicts, our opportunities are great, indeed they're infinite. The point is, and this is the critical matter to be emphasized to you, that we must accept our role, that we must find solutions, and that Republican solutions are practicable and can be superior to the simplistic application of government money and bureaucratic administration of the Democrats to the depression-created nostrums of the 30s. They have either been long since completed or their purpose is completely out of date.
Begun some sort of demonstration down on the floor, but we can't really pinpoint the reason for it as yet. Horns began to blow. These horns, there you see one right now. These were being distributed outside the hall tonight, being given apparently indiscriminately to both Reagan and Ford supporters. The reason we can hardly fathom. It's certainly going to lead to pandemonium in this hall tonight. And if Senator Javits can get through in a whole speech here with all these horns in the hall, I'd be very much surprised. It's really going to be something when the nominating speeches begin, and whether they can hold these crowds of enthusiasts down while they get through the nominating speeches will also be something we'll have to be watching for. And there are small cowbells to be added. Originally, the rules by the convention arrangements people were no noisemakers in the hall, nor any signs to be hung from the hall, but they certainly have yielded on that tonight. CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention will continue in a moment.
CBS News continues its special report, Campaign 76. Tonight, the fourth session of the Republican National Convention from the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. This portion is sponsored by the people of Ford Motor Company on behalf of Ford and Lincoln Mercury dealers. Ford wants to be your car company. Now, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Well, something set off the Reagan supporters here a moment ago. It may have been the entrance of a couple of members of the Reagan family. Nancy Reagan herself is in the perimeter of the hall and will be entering any time now, as is Mrs. Ford. So we can expect when those two ladies come into this Kemper Arena that, again, bedlam will ensue. This is a very spirited crowd, a word I've used before, and which I think is probably the best one for the particular occasion. There was a little imbroglio down at one corner of the floor not too long ago. Some people erected a Reagan sign right in front of Mrs. Ford's box. She's not here yet. And some Ford people came along and put a sign in front of it, and that started a little bit of a discussion. No blows exchanged or anything like that, but it got pretty heated before finally both signs were removed a little distance away, and that seemed to settle that. There may be a little bit of a repercussion from one of those little problems we saw on the floor last night. If you remember the bit of a brouhaha in the New York delegation, all we really knew at the time was that someone ripped out one of the delegation phones to the Ford command post and then was escorted out of the arena as the Ford delegates and the chairman in New York chased them out of the hall. Well, we know a bit more now. Douglas Bischoff is a Reagan delegate from Utah, and he says he just saw red last night when Vice President Rockefeller, sitting there in the New York delegation, refused to return a Reagan poster that he'd snatched from a delegate. Well, that's when Bischoff rushed forward, grabbed the phone, and ripped it out. It all led to confusion in the arena. If you remember, some laughter from Reagan, who was watching it all on television. We caught a picture of him doing that. Well, now there may be more serious repercussions. There's Nancy Reagan about to enter the hall. State Senator Douglas Bischoff, this man from Utah, was involved in that altercation. Let's listen in as Jim McManus now is with Mrs. Reagan.
I do.
Jim?
Now, he has been forced in recent days to just declare repeatedly that he is not now or ever will be interested in the vice presidency.
He certainly has.
Have you discussed it with him previous to coming to the convention, however?
He has always said it. He has said it for 9 months. I don't know how many times you can say this. I think I said this to you all last night, right here.
There's talk on the convention floor that they might open the convention and nominate Ronald Reagan for vice president with or without his consent. If they did, what would be the reaction then?
Oh, I don't think that'll happen.
But if they did?
I doubt that would happen.
Mrs. Reagan, personally, do you still retain hope for some sort of tide that might develop this evening?
I don't know. You know, this has been such a campaign with so many surprises in it. I really don't know.
But you will not say definitely that...
Oh, you really don't have to do that.
If they did vote him on the floor...
No, he's not interested in the vice presidency.
Well, where is your air horn and your confetti?
Oh, I don't know.
You're just going to watch the demonstration.
I think I've got to go in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, excuse me.
And now Mrs. Ford is entering the hall, and you hear the cheers going up for her and the signs being waved. Another big demonstration. fight song. And with Mrs. Ford is her daughter Susan and son Jack. That's her eldest son. We saw Sonny Bono, the performer, over there. He's in the next box. Last night it was Tony Orlando in that same box, greeting the Fords as they arrived. While this demonstration continues, Dan Rathers with former Governor John Connally of Texas. Dan?
Walter, John Connally walked into the alternate section of this convention hall just before this present demonstration and planted a demonstration of his own and for him. Governor, what everybody's interested in is, among other things, President Ford's vice presidential choice. Now, some stories have circulated that you're out of it, you've been told you're out of it, and you know it. Are those stories true?
No, they're not true. I may be out of it, Dan, but I certainly have not been told that. I don't know it. I don't know how seriously I was ever in it. And I don't know of all the 20 people whose names have been considered, I suspect I'm probably the most relaxed of all of them. Because
now, Governor, you've also been quoted as saying that you wouldn't accept the vice presidential nomination unless President Ford gave you assurances that Henry Kissinger would not remain as Secretary of State. Did you say that?
No, that's absolutely untrue, Dan. I never made any such statement at all.
You never told anybody that?
That would be both presumptuous and arrogant in the first place. In the second place, I don't believe that.
Now, Governor, in your heart of hearts, do you expect to get the call tomorrow?
I don't really know, and I really don't know. The only thing I've said to the president was that I thought he ought to pick the best candidate he could possibly pick to help him win this election. I think it's terribly important that he win the election, and I think that he ought to have a running mate that can contribute to that. And it would be only that on that basis that I would be interested in the first place.
Do you think that Ronald Reagan is interested?
I don't know. Reagan has consistently said that he doesn't want to do it, he's not going to do it. You have to believe that he means it. But, you know, I always take that with a grain of salt. I remember 1960.
Walter?
You know, we've got the battle of the wives here again tonight, even as the demonstration got rolling for Mrs. Ford and Nancy Reagan entered the hall. Mike Wallace is with her now.
Well, I'm behind her, Walter, and this is a case of one-upswomanship. Here's how it worked. Maureen Reagan, her daughter, said, "We're going to get the end of it tonight. That is, the better end of it tonight." What happened was that the Reagan family, Maureen, who is over here, and Ron, and Mike, arrived here about 10 minutes ahead of time. The Reagan demonstration began, but Nancy Reagan didn't get here. That triggered Mrs. Ford's coming here, and then after the Ford demonstration had wound down a little bit, in order to get the end of the demonstration, then Nancy Reagan came here. Mrs. Reagan, how are you? Tell me something. This really sounds like a genuine, spontaneous outpouring of affection for you, win, lose, or whatever. Don't you think so?
I can't really hear you, Mike.
I say this really sounds like a genuine outpouring of warmth and affection for you, whether you win, lose, or whatever. I think this is going to go on for a little while, and I think that you heard all of it before, Walter. He has said over and over again, and the governor has said over and over again, no way for the vice presidency.
And in Mrs. Ford's box, well, that's all the Reagan children there, as you see, and in the Ford box, there Michael and Jack, Stephen, all of the three Ford boys, and Susan, their daughter. The chairman of this convention, Don Rhodes, has been banging the gavel, and he's been shouting over the public address system to these delegates, stop acting like a Democratic convention, or as the Republicans say, a Democrat convention. Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message. There's nobody in this hall who remembers anything like this at a political convention, because there hasn't ever been anything like this at a political convention before. A battle of the wives of the First Lady of the land and the lady who would like to be the First Lady of the land, Mrs. Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Gerald Ford, at opposite ends of this arena, at Kemper Arena, both accepting the cheers of their partisans for their husbands, and leading the cheering, as you can see Mrs. Ford doing, waving to the crowd, as you can see Mrs. Reagan doing. Nothing like this has ever happened before, and this is the third night of it. As Mike Wallace reported just a moment ago, it seems to be strategically planned on both of the parts of both camps here. Tonight, Mrs. Ford finally entered the hall first, and just as the cheers were really getting going for her, then Mrs. Reagan came into the hall to take the bloom off the rose and get the Reagan portion of the hall cheering for her. They interrupted a speech from Senator Jacob Javits of New York. He's part of a vanishing breed in the Republican Party, the Republican liberal. Eric Severide and Bill Moyers have some thoughts on that political phenomenon.
This battle of the wives is pretty, takes one over one's mind very considerably, Walter. It's probably the best testament to the value of a good marriage on both sides of this hall that one could imagine.
You'd have a tough time running for president if you're a bachelor.
Yes, indeed. We've had some extraordinary first ladies in the last many years. I can hardly think of any of them that's put a foot wrong. Can you, Bill?
No, I really can't. I saw buttons today saying, "I'm for Betty Ford's husband," and
right.
Several people said, I wish Betty Ford were running, and that's been true of a lot of Democratic.
All this started in the middle or the first part of Senator Jack Javits' speech. And it was not a demonstration or an interruption aimed directly at him or an expression of resentment from the floor against Javits, but it does amount to an expression of a kind of indifference to him, I would think. He's one of the last token liberals of prominence left in this organized party, and the first man in this convention who I think to be really trying to talk about simple humane matters, the poor and the weak and the wretched of this land. He's a liberal Republican from a city, a state that has a lot of trouble with human beings in that condition, but there's been very little of that. They don't seem to want to hear it. So many of these people come from other places. These sunny, fresh cities of the South and the West don't have those worries the same way, do they, Bill? I don't think they worry too much about New York.
No, they don't, unfortunately. There will be 150 million potential voters on Election Day of 1976, and for the first time, Eric, the South and the West will have over half of them. This represents the strength of this party, and it represents some significant changes in the Democratic Party as well. This has been all week a fight not between the liberal and the conservative wing of the Republican Party, but between two conservative contending forces. In fact, we were saying the other day that some surgery's been done on the Republican Party, and when this bird takes off, it'll have two wings both on the right side.
The old liberal wing of it has just about lost its cloud, it seems to me. And there's been a big shift in the country itself that I don't think all of us understand very clearly. I'm not sure I do, but there's some obvious facts of a fundamental nature. There's been such a shift of people and money from the north, northeast, the Great Lakes regions, to the south and to the west, the so-called Sun Belt area, that is changing our economy, the way we live, the balance of internal power politically. It's been an enormous shift. And one of the funny things about it is that so many of the conservatives represented here from the South and the West are complaining about government spending, but those regions, those southern and western states, on the whole, get more federal tax money poured into them than they return in taxes. And the reverse is true of places like New York and some of the older industrial places. They pay out more than they get back. And yet it is people down in the southwest part of the country that seem to complain the most about federal spending.
Horace Greeley was a true Republican prophet when he told the men to go west, and they have. You know, there are twice as many voters Eric, in the suburbs, small cities, the rural areas of America as there are in the large cities. And this, of course, can be a troubling thing as you look down the road. There is a schism in this country. In the 1960s, we, in a sense, settled the civil rights problem by leaving the blacks in the cities and surrounding them with suburban areas that are white. It can lead to a very serious schism and conflict down the road.
One of the strange ironies in all this, a cruel irony for the northern and northeastern states and cities, is that while the Sun Belt prospers, they have shipped so many hundreds of thousands of their poor and semi-literate people, unskilled people, to the north, which then has this tremendous welfare burden. Welfare is the one item in that exchange where more is paid in federal money to the north and the northeast than to the south and the west.
But it'll be an issue with us for a long while.
Well, it requires a complete rethinking of our politics, our economy, and what life's going to be like in this country, I believe.
And I haven't seen in either platform or any of the speeches here, or for that matter at the Democratic Convention, a true proposal trying to resolve that fundamental conflict.
Thank you. Go back to Walter Cronkite.
The hall finally quieted down enough for Senator Javits to resume his speech. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like very much to have your attention because the chair is about to make a very important announcement. This has to do with the reason we came here, that reason being to nominate the next President of the United States. The chair would like to remind all the delegates of the procedure.
Chairman John Rhodes is just making the announcements preceding the roll call for nominations for the presidential balloting, and here he is.
Step will be to call the roll of the states to determine which states intend to place a name in nomination. Before I ask the Secretary of the Convention to call the roll of the states for the purpose of determining which states wish to place a name in nomination, I want to remind the delegates of the provisions of Rule 16 as amended by the Convention when the report of the Committee on Rules was adopted. As amended, Rule 16 requires that before a name can be placed in nomination, such person must, and I quote, demonstrate majority support from each of 5 state delegations. It's the end of the quote. That is the rule under which we shall be operating. Therefore, when the Secretary calls the roll of the states, in order to determine which ones wish to place a name in nomination,
I shall ask the chairman of each delegation indicating a desire to make a nomination to state that his or her delegate will cast a majority of its votes for the candidate it will nominate. Ladies and gentlemen, may we please have order? There are delegates who cannot hear this pronouncement, and it is an important pronouncement. It has to do with the procedure for the nomination of the candidates for president. Will you please indulge the chair until I have been able to explain the ground rules under which we will operate? Therefore, when the Secretary calls the roll of the states in order to determine which ones wish to place a name in nomination, I shall ask the chairman of each delegation indicating a desire to make a nomination to state that his or her delegation will cast a majority of its votes for the candidate it will nominate. If the chairman's answer is in the affirmative, I will then ask the chairman to identify the other 4 state delegations which are prepared to support the candidate for nomination with a majority of their votes. If those states which are identified support the statement of the chairman of the delegation preparing to make a nomination, such name may properly under Rule 16 be placed in nomination. Following the completion of this call, the chair will recognize those states who indicated an intention to place a name in nomination. Under Rule 16 of the convention, the total time for nominating speeches and seconding speeches for any candidate for president shall not exceed 15 minutes. When the names of candidates have been placed in nomination, the chair will ask the secretary to call the roll of states for the purpose of voting. Under Rule 16 of the convention, once the secretary has begun to call the roll, it cannot be dispensed with for any reason. Therefore, all states will be called. If any state desires to pass at this time, it may, of course, do so. At the conclusion of the first call of the roll, the secretary will proceed to call the names of those states which passed. No delegation will be recognized to change its vote until all delegations which passed have been given a second opportunity to vote. This is in accord with Rule 18B. Finally, the chair wishes the delegates to be aware of Rule 17, which states, and I quote, "When it appears at the close of the roll call that any candidate for the nomination for president or vice president has received the majority of the votes entitled to be cast in the convention, the chairman of the convention shall announce the question to be, shall the nomination of the candidate be made unanimous?" Now, if the delegates will please take their seats and clear the aisles, we are now ready to begin the very important business of nominating the next President of the United States. Before I ask the Secretary to call the roll,